welcome to debate number 2 of the Citadel debate series. Today's debate is on balance, green energy policies hurt the global poor. For any audience member wondering what on balance means, it just means overall, all things considered. So at the end of it, you think 51% hurts the global poor, you would agree on the pro side. Speaking of the pro side is Philosophical Zombie Hunter, aka PZH, and on the con is Trader. You guys have agreed to do the partial formal. So we will start with a quick opening line from each of you. You have 4 minutes to do it, although I'm guessing it'll be under that. But in any case, we will start off with the pro side. PZH, when you are ready, you have 4 minutes to make your argument.
Okay, give me a sec. So I made like a small thing for some diagrams because it's gonna be like some evidence heavy to some degree, but I'll start anyway. So I just like to tell like a story in 4 parts. Last year in October 2021, the UK experienced a spike in energy prices. It turns out that during that year, we had low winds. Now, the UK had invested a lot in wind turbines, and it also shut off its coal mines, which is important for the UK because the UK has a lot of coal, always had a lot of coal, but it chose to shut it down for green energy policies. As a result of shutting down its coal and investing heavily in wind, and we had low wind during that year, we had an issue with energy, and we needed natural gas, which was one of the remaining options in the energy mix to compensate if we don't have enough from the other sources. Normally, we would borrow from our neighbors, our neighboring countries, but apparently everyone else had the same problem as we did, and energy prices spiked. This resulted in 7 of our energy companies in the UK going bankrupt, including the one I was on. I was moved on to another company that at the time I was on a very good rate. When I moved forcefully to another company, I got a rate that was 2.5-3 times more to pay for the energy than I was before. I wasn't unique in this sense, and over time those energy prices went even further. And around the start of the year, in 2022, we had issues with the elderly who are on fixed income, the poor, making decisions between buying food or paying for heat. That's one of the elements how this hurts the poor. In addition, companies in the UK noticed that their energy prices were exceeding their rents, and a lot of them closed down, again hurting the poor who were hired by those companies. On the continent of Europe, Germany was suffering something similar. Its energy sector had to, its aluminium sector had to stop smelting as much because energy was just very expensive. And Volkswagen, which is the second largest car manufacturer in the world, sometime recently said that it would leave Germany and it would not come back to the continent because of high energy prices. It would invest in other places. In a sense, Europe, including the UK, are deindustrializing. This loss of jobs again hurts the poor. But Europe does have a lot of money currently to pay for natural gas and buy it from wherever it can around the world. Other countries are not so lucky. Sri Lanka, for example, due to high energy prices because it needs to import fossil fuels and the price of synthetic fertilizer, which is made from fossil fuels,
10 seconds.
The country wasn't able to import those in, and it collapsed economically and politically, against hurting the poor. I had another point about people in Africa, but I'm going to have to delay that to the rest of the talk. But that's my opening.
All right, okay. Trader.
Okay, so I'll just probably keep it under 4. Just respond to a few things that I noticed from the opening. The first thing that I think stood out the most was you entirely focused on present day costs of energy policies. But when we're looking on balance, the reason why these energy policies are being implemented is primarily to avoid future costs from climate change. And I could agree that the present day green policies, they are costly versus a situation where we have no green policies at all. It does increase energy prices. It does create disruption in job markets. People who were in the oil and gas industry before, a lot of them had to find new jobs. So I won't dispute the fact that there are costs today, and that many of these costs are, they're borne by the poorest people in any given society. But I think when we look on the other side of the equation, which is the medium to long term effects that climate change is going to have, and especially the fact that these effects are going to primarily hurt the global poor, then I think it becomes pretty clear that the costs that we have today for these policies, which definitely exist, they're nothing in comparison to how bad things are going to be in a no action situation in terms of climate change. Primarily, I'll be talking about things that are like by 2050, by 2100 in the no action scenario. And obviously, there's still going to be negative impacts from climate change, even in a situation where we do continue our green policies and even add more on top of it. But the difference between these two scenarios is massive. And it's not about people on a low income having to balance their budget between like food and heat. We're talking hundreds of millions of climate migrants creating migration crises that we've never seen before, and we have no idea how we're even going to start to approach it. Entire ecosystems are going to collapse. Political structures are going to become completely unstable. Large swaths of land that are currently densely populated are going to be uninhabitable. And these are all things that we can mitigate through action today. And so even though there are present day costs, they're nothing compared to the eventual costs that they're going to, that we can avoid by using them. And I'll end my statement there. We can get into the back.
All right. Yeah, so since we're already kind of getting into a little bit of back and forth, so I guess I'll let PZH make the call as they wish. You can have an uninterrupted reply period, and then Trader can do the same, or we can just kind of start weaning it from here. But either case, you have the floor, PZH.
We can do the back and forth now. So I've mentioned a few points that we have had a country that was unable to import fossil fuels collapse economically and financially. So Sri Lanka. We do have currently people earning under, let's say there's 6 billion people on the planet earning under than $10 a day. 3 billion people have unreliable access to energy, or the access to energy they have currently is the same as a American refrigerator. And of those 3 billion, 800 billion don't have access to energy at all. So I'm assuming their lives are not the same quality of life as people in Europe. And the question really is, you have a hypothetical scenario based on computer models largely that's saying all these things will happen in the future. So the question is, how many people are you okay to die now for a hypothetical future where many more will die?
Well, I mean, when you say hypothetical, I don't think that the implication that this is like uncertain is warranted, because I mean, for example, just
could you answer the question though? Could you answer the question?
Well, I mean, if it turned out to be the case that current green policies increase energy prices and we'd expect, say, 10,000 people to die today as a direct result of increased energy prices, and we expected that that difference to save 5 million people over the next 50 years, then I'd say that yes, we should do that policy. And
Okay,
I think
so
that is about the scale that we're dealing with. Like, I think that the magnitude of costs is like several orders of magnitude higher for climate change versus like present economic issues.
okay, so you have some catastrophic picture in the future, and you're saying the things we do now justify actions that prevent that thing in the future, including and you are, in addition to that statement, you're also happy that the price of fossil fuels obviously are going up. That means that people use less of them and will be forced to move away from them. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, even at the cost of, if people don't have heat this winter and they might freeze to death on the continent of Europe, which is a obviously relatively rich continent, that is a price worth paying for this catastrophic future you have in mind.
I mean, I'll just say yes. It just is, because especially when we look at the numbers involved between, the number of people who are dying in Europe because of lack of heat versus the number of people that we expect to die in 2050 from climate disasters. It's like they're not even comparable. They're not even remotely comparable.
Okay. Are you aware that in the last that deaths from climate disasters are down 98%?
Could you explain that?
I can even give you a graph if you like. Hold on.
Just what do you mean by climate disasters, and over what period are they down?
Yeah,
98?
give me.
I find it pretty hard to believe. Just
Sure. Give me a second. I'll put a graph for you. Is this the right one? Yeah. So climate-related deaths, floods, droughts, storms, wildfires, extreme temperatures, they're down by 98%. Were you aware of that?
Deaths per year, average per decade. Hold on, I just have to read the explanation.
Yeah. Take your time. I'll take a drink.
Is this specifically? Is this this is global, right?
Yes.
Well, I mean, I'd say there's a few confounding variables here, which is like, one is that just the level of development, economic development in the world, since this graph starts at 1920.
Mm-hmm.
And we've just made huge strides in infrastructure, huge strides in just like standards of living across the world. So just from that, which is like, that factor has no bearing on changes in the environment. Because if you actually looked at instead frequency of climate-related disasters, they are on an uptrend, and that's part of what goes into these models, that we know that these are going to increase in the future as well.
Let's put a pin on the frequency, because I'll dispute that but let's just continue with this line for now, and I'll get back to frequency later. You mentioned that we're able to adapt to the environment, and as a result, less people die. Why can't we continue adapting to the environment, and as a result, fewer people will die?
Because the magnitude and frequency are going to increase at a faster rate than they have in the past. This is going.
And how do you know this?
It's based on the climate models. I'm not a climate scientist, but there is very large consensus in the field that these models, are the best we can do at predicting these things. Like, we have very high confidence of a lot of things.
Which climate model predicts catastrophe? Because I've seen the climate models, I've read the IPCC data, and there are basically the trend, if I could summarize in a sentence, is not without risk but manageable, I think, is the sentence that the IPCC used. So where is this climate catastrophe coming from is my question. At what CO2 parts per million number do we start hitting catastrophe?
Well, I mean,
where is this?
The most recent IPCC report, which I was just reading in preparation for this, they show their confidence level of different predictions.
Mm-hmm.
And they do say, I could try to find the exact sentence, but I know that they assign high confidence to the idea that there's going to be an increase in climate disasters, an increase in the frequency due to.
But does that translate to deaths per se? So, for example, let's say there's a flood. Yeah, let's say there's a flood. Let's say there's a flood in like a part of Europe and a flood in Haiti. Now, Haiti, for example, you know, the last flood that was there killed 10,000 people, but a flood in Europe will not. Like, they have stronger houses, they can have like water dikes and stuff like that.
Yep.
Well,
this would
cost some money.
To you know, one of the qualifications of our debate statement, which is the global poor. The global poor don't have the infrastructure to deal with the scale of natural disasters that are going to happen. Like, for example, in Bangladesh, the IPCC report says by 2050, since they're in sort of like lowland, a lot of their lands are like low at sea level or below in some cases. 10% of the population is going to be displaced by flooding over the next, I guess it's less than 30 years now.
Amsterdam is already below sea level. It's not being flooded.
Right, but they don't have the climate events, and just generally raising of sea level also makes flooding more likely, more common.
No, they are currently below sea levels. They can have flooding. If they didn't do anything about it, Amsterdam and the Netherlands, large parts of it would be flooded currently, but it is not. Do you know why?
Well, that's Amsterdam and the Netherlands, where they have, you know, better infrastructure. They can build, you know,
so
levees and seawalls, things like that, if they want to.
So we agree.
Bangladesh doesn't have that infrastructure in place.
We agree that infrastructure can help save lives. Yes.
Yes, but it can't be developed in time.
What does infrastructure need to be developed?
I don't know the exact infrastructure projects that Bangladesh needs. That
in
the report is saying that the best option for these people is to leave. They're not saying, let's build all these things here. They're saying these lands are going to be uninhabitable in 30 years.
Trader, give me a second here. I'm familiar with the topic. I'm just trying to explain it to you. So let's just say, to build infrastructure, let's say you need heavy machinery, yeah? Like diggers, tractors, stuff that moves large rocks from point A to point B, and concrete and all that kind of stuff to build infrastructure. Yeah, I'm talking in general. I'm not pinning you on specifics or anything. Yeah?
Okay, sure.
And would you agree that needs fossil fuels or energy to power those machinery to build that infrastructure?
Yeah.
So if we had, let's say, an abundance of energy, like unlimited right now, and Bangladesh needed to, you know, in 50 years build infrastructure, do you think that, and in addition, let's say, to building infrastructure, it needed to improve its economy, its GDP, do you think that energy or unlimited energy would help in both those cases and therefore help them adapt to the environment?
I mean, it would help. It wouldn't be enough. If you're putting forward the hypothetical of like them having like post scarcity, like infinite resources, then like, okay, sure, they could build like a giant dome over their entire country, but like that's not a realistic case. The realistic case is, even if energy was at, you know, cheaper levels, like if energy prices drop by 30%, it's not going to be enough for Bangladesh to mitigate the impending climate catastrophe that's right at its doorstep.
Okay, so I'm gonna have to like pause the direction of the debate and like just try to get you to justify this catastrophe, because you have something in your head that's not accurate. So I'm gonna have to ask you to justify where you're getting this catastrophe from, who's saying that will be a catastrophe, and that we cannot adapt to it fast enough.
So I read this on the IPCC site. If you give me a second, I can find the actual paragraph that I'm reading from. But I mean, just while I'm looking for this,
well, I need tell you what. Give me a temperature or give me a parts per million. Let's do it this way.
Sure. Okay.
What is the percentage? What is the current percentage of CO2 in the atmosphere?
I don't know that. I could tell you the current level of warming from our baseline.
But we're arguing obviously over emissions, and the emissions in the atmosphere is what is then leading to warming. What is the current?
Yeah, but I don't think we need to focus on that particular metric when we know there's a high correlation between that and temperature. And I can tell you our temperature today is 1.1 degrees Celsius over the end of the 19th century.
Right. So in 142 years, we've increased, as a result of CO2. Let's say, I'm not going to argue this point. I'll agree. As a result of us, industrializing and using various forms of energy. In the last 142 years, we've increased by 1.1 Celsius. I agree completely.
Okay.
I would answer the question saying that currently in the atmosphere, the percentage of the atmosphere that's CO2 is 0.04% or 400 parts per million.
Okay.
So what parts per million figure do we start seeing disasters that we should avoid?
You're asking me for the specific parts per million. I can tell you in terms of temperature raises.
Okay, but
Which
I
I feel
would
like
like
would
the
be
parts per. I would like the
efficient.
parts per million
Why?
because that's
Why do you
relevant
need
to
that?
emissions.
I mean, it's relevant, but why do you need that specific number? I feel like you're just trying to like pin me down on like minutia to like get me in a corner, but like it's not really important for what we're talking about. Because I can give you the temperature
I'll answer
levels.
your question. I'll answer your question. So you're saying that we need to let thousands of people die in the present. We need to spend trillions of dollars to avoid something that can happen in the future. I'm asking for like a tipping point or some sort, even in the models that you have.
I'm happy to provide that. I can give
okay.
you the actual numbers in terms of temperature increases. I can give that to you.
No, I need in parts per million relevant to emissions.
Why?
Because we are arguing over using energy that produces emissions or
okay,
emits.
so I mean, can you agree to this? Can you say that? Do you think that there is a high correlation between our emissions and increases in global temperature over time?
I've already agreed to that.
Okay, so if we agree that there's this high correlation, then why do you need one number versus the other? Which I admit I don't know the particular part per million that will correspond to different temperature increases. And actually, it doesn't even make a whole lot of sense to use that metric because for a given part per million number, it's not like we've emitted this many parts per million, and therefore there's this exact stable temperature over time. Because what impacts the climate, or what impacts like all of these effects directly, is the actual temperature, not the parts per million.
Sure, but you just agreed. You just made the case that there's a connection between emissions and temperature, right? So
I did.
I'm just, and you're saying the temperature causes this thing. I'm not disputing that.
Okay,
so I'm just asking,
clear,
like, if you're saying, yeah, go on.
If I tell you that right now we're at 1.1 degrees Celsius above baseline, and that I can tell you the different predictions that are going to happen if we keep it under 2 degrees Celsius by 2100. I can tell you how much worse those are going to be by if it was instead 4 degrees Celsius by 2100. I can tell you that difference is going to be made by our policies now in terms of emissions. But you're going to say you don't care about any of that because I can't give you the exact parts per million that correspond with these numbers.
Look, you have all these models, right? The models necessarily, you have 5 different models from the IPCC. The models necessarily double or triple the parts per million. That's how they are based. That's how they are calculated. So they take like the planet and said like a scenario, what happens if we continue the trajectory of this particular emissions or CO2. And then they have 5 different scenarios. So I'm just asking you, I don't think I'm tricking you or anything like this. Is just obviously you would argue that the more emissions we have, the more temperature we have, and you've said there is a connection between the two already. So from the emissions that we are emitting as a result of needing to use fossil fuels, what is the tipping point that we have this disaster, that millions die, displaced, flooded?
To be clear, it's not a matter of a tipping point. It's a matter of incremental increases in the frequency of these disasters.
When does it become really bad?
I mean, to be clear, the Bangladesh catastrophe, that's like pretty much a foregone conclusion at this point. We're not really avoiding it. That's like a near-term disaster that's going to happen. But I put that forward as an example of the type of things that climate change is going to cause. And the difference between us reaching a level of 2 degrees warming by 2100
versus I would argue
this sort of like no action case, which would be 4 degrees, is going to be an increased frequency of major events like that. So there's no tipping point. There's no tipping point. It's every
so I need to
understand 0.1 degrees Celsius is going to be additional, human and economic disaster.
Okay, sure. But you're saying 4 degrees Celsius. That means we're doubling the CO2 to 800 parts per million. Because that's
I don't know if it's a perfect.
You gave me the IPCC. You gave me the worst.
I don't think that really matters.
I am telling you. I'm telling you that you just chose the highest IPCC option.
Well,
And
to be
that's
clear,
doubling.
that option, okay, the 4 and their range that they give it's like 2.8 to 6.2 degrees, which is the no action scenario. Which is
What
the
does
scenario
no
that you're
action mean
advocating.
though?
It means
What
we
does
stop doing green policies. We just let the market do what the market will do.
Can
That's how
read?
That's how they get that.
Can you read the IPCC report when it comes to adaptation? Because if you've listened to the head of the IPCC from the UN side, he repeatedly calls recently for more adaptation in poorer countries, in Bangladesh, in Africa. That means that these countries have to grow their GDP and build their infrastructure. That's the part of adaptation. Right. And they can't do that without access to cheap energy. It's literally a one-to-one.
I mean, they can.
It's literally a one. If I can just finish, it's literally a one-to-one. If they don't have access to cheap energy, they can't power machines. They can't.
No, it's not one-to-one.
They can't grow their economy. They're not going to do it by hand.
It's not one-to-one. There's already programs in place, which I agree they do need more funding. They need more countries supporting it, but there are policies in place to assist these countries that are most vulnerable with developing this infrastructure. It's not by making energy cheaper. It's by
are you saying foreign aid? Are you saying foreign aid is going to fix the problem? Sorry, is that the implication?
No, I'm not saying it's going to fix the problem. I'm saying you made the case that their ability to develop infrastructure for adapting to climate change is one-to-one with energy prices. The idea that if we increase energy prices, we decrease the infrastructure these people have.
I'm saying that energy.
That's not the only way to develop.
I'm saying that energy. So, are you familiar with EROI and energy return on investment?
I'm not, but I guess.
Are you familiar with energy economics? A little bit.
Sure.
Cool. So basically, if for just in general, just in like abstract philosophical terms, you need energy to power machines, right? Machines need machine food. And when the more machines you have, the more output that machines can produce, either in terms of agriculture or in terms of like building machines that build like concrete and infrastructure and stuff, or machines that just produce stuff. They need machine energy, and machine energy is can be in this case depending on what, either electricity or fuel or stuff like that, right? There is a lot of evidence, and it's pretty much like a foregone conclusion that the more energy you have, or the more access to energy you have, the higher your GDP can increase as a result of this structure of machines. Yeah,
of course.
Okay, so and we need more people to have access to that for them to improve their economy and then be able to afford to build more infrastructure. Is that an okay statement to say? Or
that's where I disagree with that. We don't need.
You disagree with that? Okay.
So I do agree in a vacuum. All you said, all of that just came to the conclusion that in a vacuum, cheaper energy equals increased GDP. Of course, that's true. But it seems like you're trying to make the case that the only way for these countries to develop the infrastructure they need to adapt to climate change in an appropriate way is for there to be lower energy prices. I agree that that's one way that they could accomplish that, but it's not the only way. You can, like I said before, you have international aid, and that doesn't have the secondary effect of increasing the problem that they're trying to address globally.
So I'm all ears. What are the other ways of improving their infrastructure to adapt to the environment that is not to do with them improving their economy?
Well, I mean, like I said, the international aid is the option.
So foreign aid, yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah. So you have this like kind of white European approach that we can send the money and that will solve the problem. I've run into this before. Can you explain to me how that worked? Because as far as I know, all the foreign aid that has gone to Africa has basically gone nowhere. It's been a sunk cost, and there's a lot of arguments over which foreign aid, which programs help, which programs hurt. So some foreign aid just goes nowhere. Let me just finish for a second.
I could turn this right back on you though.
Let me just finish my argument. Okay. Some foreign aid hurts the locals by saying, we're going to give you free stuff, then the people like who earned a living making that stuff before are out of a job. So far, there's been a lot of foreign aid and nothing has changed. And in particular, nothing has changed in terms of infrastructure and energy and stuff like that. So why do you think that pumping money, and you can also tell me how much money you think, like, is it 1 trillion, is it 10 trillion, is it 20 trillion into the continent of Africa, let's say? Because right now, for example, there are children or premature babies sitting in hospital in incubators that do not have access to reliable energy, and when the energy is out, the incubator cannot warm them anymore, and they die, and that's just a fact. Just a fact of what there is at the moment. And even if you had, like, let's say, solar there, at nighttime they won't have solar there, and they won't have access to reliable energy. Most of the people, I don't know if most, but a large number of people in Africa have access to heat only through cutting down trees and animal dung, just for cooking. So
Like
we
I
are
said
currently
before-
we are
like I said
hurting these
before,
people. We are hurting these people right now for your
denying-
energy policies.
I'm not denying that increased energy costs will have very real costs. It will affect people in a very real way. But I mean, I can give you the example of what we're expecting by 2050. This is the consensus, like average estimate, is that we're going to have 200 million climate migrants by year 2050. You know, I feel terrible for the people the babies in incubators, but like 200 million migrants is going to be a global crisis, an unprecedented global crisis.
Look, there's no consensus on the climate catastrophe models. There's no scientific consensus on it.
There's not a consensus, but there's a range of estimates by people who study this, and that's sort of the middle estimate.
There is a list. Let me tell you what there is.
Billion, some go as low as 20 million.
Let me tell you what
20
there
million
is
a massive issue.
Okay, so I'm going to say I'm going to disagree that you have evidence or accurate evidence that says there's going to be climate catastrophes. And in addition to that, I'm going to disagree that if we project the current rates of increased GDPs, that your estimates say we do nothing, not only in terms of like reducing emissions, but also do nothing in terms of adapting to the environment, in terms of building infrastructure that protect us from the environment. So your whole modeling, the models that you're using, is from a very small number of research. There is no scientific consensus around it. There's no scientific consensus around the climate catastrophe. There is around warming. There is around the connection between CO2 and warming, but the catastrophe part specifically is hyped up or overly hyped up. The numbers you're giving me are scenarios where we don't adapt to the environment. That is a fact. I've just given you a trend that you seem to be ignoring completely, that we are getting better and better at adapting to the environment.
We are, but there's some things that we cannot adapt to, and especially if you look at it region by region.
Give me one thing. Give me one thing. Just one thing.
The expansion of deserts. So one of the things that goes part and parcel with warming is that deserts, especially in equatorial areas, start expanding. And so areas that could support crops before, could support life, are now inhabitable. You can't live there.
Okay, 2 points.
There's no, do you expect these extremely poor regions to do like cloud seeding, like Saudi Arabia? Like, how do you do that?
Allow me to answer your point. So you're saying deserts will expand, but I can also say that green areas will expand somewhere else where they were too cold to be there before.
Sure, so but where are those areas?
Sorry?
Where are the areas that are now expanding to, support life, support agriculture?
Well, okay, so would you agree right now?
That's a rhetorical question. I can answer. It's going to be in, the far north and far south. And there's many more people who are like in the northern hemisphere. There's a lot more land in the far north. I guess you have Australia, but like these are rich areas generally. It's going to be Canada, Northern Europe.
You're concerned about rich areas and poor areas.
Well, the topic of this debate is that the effect on the global poor.
Great.
And
okay,
what's going to happen is equatorial areas are going to become far more inhospitable to agriculture, to just human settlement. And we're going to get some new areas in like Sweden and Norway.
I understand. Well, Norway has already like some green areas, I understand. But would you agree right now that even in the poor areas, more people die to cold than they do to heat? Like 9 times more.
I don't know the numbers.
Well, look at voice
areas, I guess.
So, for example, India, right? India has times of the year, or specifically a city in India that gets very, very hot once, a few months of the year. But in general, as a result, people could get affected by that. But in general, more people in India die of cold than they do of heat because they don't have access to to energy or like some parts of it. Sorry?
I said, okay, that's fine, but what's
Right, but 9 times more people die of cold than they do of heat.
okay?
Okay, so now with regards to, so obviously it affects them in the present. Now with regards to agriculture, I talked a bit about synthetic fertilizer, right? But should we have access to synthetic fertilizer, and even if we have very arid lands, we can still irrigate them. Irrigation means, or drip irrigation means, very little water, very little fertilizer. We can basically grow food in a desert environment right now without
Where
technology.
does the water come from?
Well, we would get that water. It can either be delivered or something like that. But with drip irrigation,
Okay, well, I mean, okay,
we can
so
grow.
you have
Right,
this
but you're
pretty
comparing.
isolated region that used
Where
to
would
have
that come
arable
from? It
land.
would come from a truck that's powered by fuel. What do you mean?
So we're gonna truck in. You know how expensive it is to truck that much water.
How much is the price of
hundreds
energy?
miles that you need to get it here.
I'm not saying hundreds of miles, but we do have. I mean, you can in areas
Well,
where
I mean,
there's slightly.
you wouldn't need that because these areas that currently have arable land in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, that are
Yeah, I'm not. I didn't mean sub-Saharan Africa, but even in the edges of sub-Saharan Africa, there's access to some water. And for example, well, I don't want to use this example right now, but there are access to water in some parts of sub-Saharan. I'm not saying we have to green all of sub-Saharan Africa for my claim to be right, but if you're saying some lands become drier, we can use drip irrigation to still keep those lands growing.
But here's the issue. So besides just transporting the water there, this was something that's also in the IPCC report. They say that they have high confidence in this finding that the available fresh water from rivers is going to decrease by 20% by 2050. And so,
on what model? On which model?
They just said it was high confidence in their
on
summary.
Which of the 5 models?
I can't cite you the exact model, but I
so
mean,
right now. Okay, so right now, for example, is it true that most of the countries in the West are actually emitting less CO2 than the 1940s?
Could be.
We're going down in CO2 emissions. Is that right or wrong?
Well, I believe we peaked globally for CO2 emissions in the 2000s. I don't know country by country.
So the West and Europe basically halved. I don't know, but the trend is going down. I can find the.
How is this at all related to the point I was making about water and how?
So the point that
irrigation is going to save these regions makes no sense.
Allow me to answer your question. So it relates to the point you're making about water, because you're choosing from the models the highest, the worst one. And if you look at the trend of reducing CO2, if you're looking at the trend of reducing CO2 emissions, you would go for one of the more middle trends, which is a much more lighter trend.
I don't believe I'm taking the 20% reduction in fresh water from rivers from the highest model.
Let me summarize it for a second. All your claims are essentially bullshit, because you're taking the worst of the worst. You're using imaginary numbers. You have nothing to prove your point. You have nothing to prove your point.
Be clear.
You're not giving me parts per million. You're not giving me anything. You're just making these outrageous emotional claims based on computer models that this will happen if we don't do anything. But we are doing something. We're both doing something in terms of reducing emission, and we're both doing something in terms of adapting to the environment. And the faster we adapt to the environment, the fewer people will die, as a fact, as a trend. So your claim is essentially bullshit. There's nothing for me to respond to, because it's just based on nothing. Okay. It's based on thin air.
So you made a bunch of assumptions there which aren't true. Like the main one being that that claim specifically, the one that I feel like you can't respond to, because your claim about using drip irrigation to save these areas that are going to be desert makes no sense. And the 20% reduction in fresh water access from rivers, the IPCC said they have different confidence ratings for different predictions that they're making, and the ones that are based on the edges of the most extreme model, they'll call that low confidence. They'll say that there's a chance this will happen, but we're not sure. And then other ones where this is the case in pretty much all the models, they'll call that high confidence. So this is one that has high confidence.
So drip irrigation uses a fraction of the water. Drip irrigation uses a fraction of the water it needed before. if the water goes down by 20%, just for argument's sake, yeah? So water goes down by 20%, where we're using like 10% of the water we used before for drip irrigation, and we can still grow in the same area. So I don't see an issue.
But the idea here is these are regions that now have no water. They have no arable land.
You said 20% less. You said 20% less,
no,
right?
Let me walk you through this, okay? So
Walk me
these
through,
areas
please.
have these areas have no water because they're in the regions that are now desert because of the expanding desert.
No, you said 20% less fresh water.
No, I'll get
right?
there. Okay.
If you want him to walk through it, you need to let him do it uninterrupted. So Trader, keep going.
Okay, so your solution was we bring in water from an external source, we truck it in, and then use drip irrigation so that they don't have to use much water and they can support crops in this now desert land.
Look, you're jumping from a few things because you're saying now with now we're in the Sahara.
PZH, you need to let him walk through it. So you need to stop talking so he can finish.
So the issue with this is where you're trekking the water from. They're the ones who now have a reduction in their fresh water source. Their fresh water source has been reduced by 20%. There's other regions that are facing the same thing. There's competition for water now because everyone's trying to get water. And so it's not an easy matter of, just truck it in. There's going to be a global shortage of fresh water. And there's going to be a lot of difficulty in transporting this all. It's not just truck it to this extremely poor isolated region. It just doesn't work like that. It's like such an oversimplification. And I mean, yeah, you could respond to that point.
Right. So basically, I think you are doing immense oversimplification now. If you've said that if a region gets 20% less fresh water, I said if we use the more advanced farming methods, we can use a fraction of the water we're doing now. So you're saying that's 20% less water, but there's still 80% of what there was before. And if you move to a more advanced irrigation methods, then you can use 10% of the water you needed before. That means there should be enough water for everyone in that region. I'm not saying we are now required to irrigate the Sahara Desert, but even if you take trucking, you can have regions in the world that's more productive at producing food, and you can truck food to areas where there's less food. We do that currently. It's not that every single place on the planet has farms and like areas of producing food right next to it. We do, division of labor. We do like produce more food in some areas. We put those on trucks and we get access and get food to people who need it. So in both cases, fairly simple changes in technology could help the local people, especially if they are earning more money, increasing their GDP in their economy to be able to then bring in more food should they need it. And if they need to make all these kind of like stuff you see in cities where they make these farms in like the middle of the cities or on the roof of something, or like a farm, so I don't know, all these kinds of like new innovations when it comes to making food in a more inhabited area. You could still have those kinds, in theory, you can still have those kinds of things where you have advanced technology making food in areas where there's more difficult to get resources, or you can just transport the food itself.
So I feel like there's a few things that you're glossing over when you say that these are just a few simple changes. It's almost as if you're imagining that these poor regions have infrastructure on par with like Western Europe or even better, that they can just truck these things around very efficiently, get food fresh to where it needs to be in these like isolated poor regions. That's just not the case. They just don't have.
I'm not saying they need Trader Joe's to deliver to them.
How do they get the
certainly
food?
Certainly you can truck rice to people. You can truck certain form of. I'm not saying you need organic food delivered European style to every part of the planet, but with regards to producing food, distributing food,
even
we're quite good at that.
Seems, I'm sorry, but just this world that you're envisioning just seems kind of absurd. That there's these people who are now living in
the world that you're envisioning is absurd too.
Now, and they were poor before.
It's not a desert now.
It's food, and they're getting like weekly trucks of rice in, and they're all just living on that, and all just like happy. Like, I just don't see that as at all a realistic situation. And the more realistic situation is these people are out in the middle of nowhere. They're isolated, and their food stops growing. It starts getting a lot hotter, and they start to starve. and so then they
Well,
leave their
I
settlement
disagree.
and they move somewhere else, looking
I
for a place.
disagree with your
that's
assessment.
survive.
So far, you haven't said anything about this. You said the water will go down by 20%. I've covered certain things you can do. Should that be the case, it's you saying that now they are a desert is an oversimplification and catastrophizing the situation as well.
To be clear,
Now
these are two separate.
we have, for example, even in Europe, we have food transported from us from all parts of the world. We can have food from South America, food from food from
Yes, that's
Taiwan.
Europe.
So
That's
the movement, the trucking and movement of food is already happening, and we're
We're
already
talking
getting
about the
food.
global poor. Europe isn't.
I
Europe
appreciate that, and I'm
has a very
saying
small share of the global poor.
I appreciate we're talking about the global poor, but I'm just saying we already have a large logistics infrastructure for the transportation of food, and should the global poor be able to access more of it through their economy improving, their quality of life will improve, even if their conditions are harsher. If their conditions are harsher, they can improve their infrastructure to adapt to that.
Do you?
And
I mean, like, it just seems crazy to me. Like, do you actually believe that these poor areas, the poorest areas of Africa, of Asia, that they're going to develop all this infrastructure, these highways, that they can transport food very efficiently from all over the world, transport water around, that they're going to develop all this infrastructure in the next 30 years, even sooner? Because like,
I think if we unleashed the content of Africa, I think the people in Africa are very hardworking. I think they're very entrepreneurial. I think currently the people in Africa have a few issues with regards to the local governments and how they are hindering them in developing their economy. Certainly, access to energy is a very important part of it, because right now, if you're chopping down trees and using animal dung to just make food and keep yourself warm, then it's a little bit difficult, thinking about how you're going to make a factory that produces this, and then you can sell to the locals to then, be more live better quality of life. So all this needs to happen, and it needs to take time. But for example, if the West says, as per the green energy policies, we're not giving you money, or we're reducing the energy production in other parts of the world so that the energy that would have reached you is now more expensive, then they are less able to.
When is the U.S. reducing energy produced in other parts of the world? What policy are they using?
So, for example, if we stop using things like coal, or if we reduce fracking, or if we reduce the extraction of fossil fuel from the ground, then that will cause demand to the supply is going down, then it will cause demand to go up. At least in these countries, they would have bought that. But if that is no longer available, then they could not afford to pull it from other parts of the globe to then reach Africa. If the energy isn't cheap, if it's not readily available, then they don't have access to it.
I mean, the U.S. and Europe, they're not just. First off, I mean, what you said before was that the U.S. is reducing supply from around the world, and then you said U.S. is just reducing their own supply, which is different. And then the other thing too is the U.S. is also reducing domestic demand also and Europe is doing the same. Like, I know Europe has different carbon tax policies to reduce domestic demand. So it's not as if they're just pushing in one direction. And I think it's actually not completely clear the effect that green policies in the U.S. and Europe will have on energy prices for Africa, for example, because they are reducing supply, but they're also reducing demand at the same time.
They are not reducing demand. That is obvious for the price of energy going up. There was a plan that the demand of fossil fuels will go down in the U.S. and therefore some refineries close down as a result to that sort of prediction in the future. But obviously, demand even for oil has gone up to more than they planned, but the capacity was not there. So the demand is still going. The demand is still. Let me look. I really do need to finish what I was saying. So the demand is going up. We are green energy policies are restricting supply in the sense that in Europe, let's say, we've stopped. Well, we haven't stopped. We've increased recently, but in theory, we should have stopped using coal. It's just that recently prices have gone up. So countries like Germany have reopened some coal factories. Otherwise, they would have severe energy prices. But in theory, There's a plan to stop using coal, just leave it in the ground. There's a plan. We don't have fracking on the continent. That is not allowed. We have fracking on the shores, in the sea around the continent, but not on the continent. Whereas America doesn't have that issue. And the fact that we are leaving these energies in the ground means that less of them supply goes down, while demand can go up in the poor regions of the world should you give them access to it.
Well, okay. I agreed with you already that the policies that we have, which reduce domestic supply, it is going to increase prices globally.
Okay, well, that hurts the poor.
I acknowledge that. But there's also policies in our sort of green policy toolkit that reduce domestic demand also, like cap and trade policies or carbon tax policies, for example.
They don't reduce the demand, they make it more expensive.
Which reduces demand domestically.
Right, but okay, let me explain how that translates, right? So right now I'm sitting in a house where I'm not turning on the heating. I'm sitting in the cold. I'm wearing like 2 jumpers because the energy is now very expensive in the UK, especially now over the winter. So in that sense, do you mean reducing demand, that I have to sit in the cold, or people who can't afford? All right. So what happens to the people in Europe that have to make that are on fixed incomes or on low incomes and have to make a choice between eating and paying for heat?
I mean, there's ways to address that. Like the government can.
Is there really? Go on, I'm all ears.
I mean, government can provide aid to low-income people.
No, it cannot. No, it cannot. It's very expensive. The UK tried to do it.
Carbon taxes. They can redistribute that money in a progressive way to help offset the increased costs.
It's not enough. It's not enough. It's really very expensive to pay for everyone's energy bills, especially now in the UK.
You don't have to pay for everyone's. You have to pay for the people who literally cannot afford to keep themselves from freezing.
They're too expensive. The trust government,
and to get back to like the line that we started on is yes. Can I just
add a point? The carbon tax just makes it. I'm familiar with the cap and trade. I understand what it is that you're saying, but you're delusional if you think that there's enough money from the cap and trade to pay for all the high energy prices we have in the UK. The Truss government that just got kicked out of let me just give an example, right? The Truss government that was kicked out of office just like a month ago, they wanted to give the highest energy subsidies that any other countries in Europe by far, and it was just a cap. They just wanted to cap the energy prices at like £2,500 per year. So it's not. And they wanted to give some help, but they obviously can't. They don't have enough money to weather the storm, even on a temporary measure. And as a result of the high spending they wanted for energy caps, and they also want to reduce some taxes to stimulate the economy, the market saw this as something very negative, and they started selling their treasuries, or what we say gilts. And the government was kicked out in 7 days. They don't have the money needed for this. The money needed for this is absolutely immense, and it's delusional. Absolutely. So it seems to me that not only are you using your imagination to what's going to happen negatively in the future based on very extreme models that do not necessarily reflect reality, even trends. It ignores trends that counter it. But you seem to also be delusional about how much money it is to help people who are then stuck with the problem from these changes. It's an immense amount. The UK government does not have anywhere near that. The German government does not have anywhere near that. I mean, I don't even know how to address it. It's just so fictional that I don't know what to do about it.
I mean, I've already told you that I'm not talking about paying for energy for everyone in the country.
Just the poor. Just the poor.
Extremely poor, who you said are going to be
even that you can't do.
Death in their homes because they
even that you can't do.
Don't have money to turn on the heater.
Even that you can't do.
A targeted program to help subsidize the costs for the very poorest countries can mitigate a lot of that.
We are trying to do that now. The government is trying to, and even then they don't have enough money. The UK doesn't. Germany doesn't have enough money, anywhere near the money needed for it.
Okay,
even just targeted.
I think we've probably talked about this enough. We can, I think, get back to what started this discussion, I guess, which is just the fact that these green energy policies are primarily in wealthy countries, the impact that this will have on poorer countries,
But you haven't justified any of it. You don't have any
Well-
evidence for saying
Well, I have
all these things will
because,
happen.
I mean, you
You have
didn't
not.
push back on the fact that these sort
You
of
haven't
like
given me any
introduction-
numbers. You haven't given me any figures. You haven't given me any
Hold on.
like. You've said the best thing you've said is that there's some degree of certainty that some countries will have 20% less fresh water. That is it. That's all you've given me. You're saying okay. Let me just say this. You're saying we have to spend trillions of dollars, hurt ourselves, hurt the poor in Europe, hurt in the present, hurt the poor in Africa and Asia in the present because some kind of scenario will happen in the future. I'm just asking you to justify it.
I mean, I feel like I haven't been able to give you the exact parts per million, but I've given you the exact temperature rises that we expect and no
Well, okay,
actions.
so you're saying 4%. You're saying 4
versus-
Celsius is that, yeah?
Yeah, I mean that's the range of the IPCC.
And why
gave
should we? And
for
why
no
should we?
action was from 2.8 to 6.2 with 4.
And
in
why
the
should we reach 4% Celsius when we're actually going down in CO2 emissions in the West right now? Why should we even get close to that?
We're going okay. So I mean, just to be clear, we're going down in rate of emissions. We're still increasing the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere at
In
a
what
very
sense?
high rate. In the sense that we're putting more CO2 into the atmosphere than natural processes are taking out of the atmosphere. So the concentration of CO2 is increasing.
Right, but the 4%, the trend that you're saying. So we can talk about taking CO2 out of the environment, but the trend right now, you're saying it's 4 Celsius by 2100. The trend
That's
is
in a no
not. The
action
trend
scenario.
is the trend right now is not that. We are doing things, so it's not going to reach 4 Celsius by 2100.
No. That's if we stop our green policies now, which is what you're advocating for, I believe.
You're right. You're saying I understand. You're saying like the worst possible is 4 Celsius, but even right
not
now,
the worst possible. That does factor in. Actually, if you look at the models, it does factor in that the rate of emissions is actually decreasing even in that model. Just
okay. So let me
because
explain.
of the fact that we have like cheaper alternatives available.
Let me explain
It's
my
just that there's
position.
no top-down government policies in that model.
Let me explain my positions. Oh, there are top-down government policies right now. There are people that reduce, even willingly, that reduce emissions at the problem. We do still have a problem that poorer countries don't have access to energy because of what we're doing right now with green energy policies. But you're saying right now that if we take everything away, we'll reach 4 Celsius. Right on path right now, you would agree that we will not reach 4 Celsius in 2100, right? Even if we just stay in the same thing we're doing at the moment, not add, not subtract.
Yeah, I believe that the one that they say for sort of continuing on, like keeping our green energy policies and sort of following the trend of,
but not
like our
adding or
plan,
subtracting,
yes.
just the same.
Just the same.
Yes.
I think. I mean, I recall that there's the no action scenario, which is 4. I recall that there's like the current planned action, like the things that we set in the Paris Accord. They expect that to be around like between 2 and 2.5.
Okay.
They
And by the way, can I just add that
5.
even the 2 and 2.5, at some point there's a plan to go down. Like the 2 and 2.5 one, it won't keep rising. It will then the heat will go down at some point. There's like it will dip.
Well, at some point, sure, but not for
no
a long
within
time.
within the 2100 up after 2050, 2060, the temperatures will go down.
No, it's not true.
It will go. If you look at the hold on, let me just paste the models. Why am I arguing? While I look for the IPCC models.
Are you sure you're not thinking like the rate of increase might go down, but the actual temperature continues to rise?
The 2 lowest or the 3 lowest estimates at some point, like in 2050, 2060, the temperature will start going down.
The lowest ones though, those are like the highly optimistic, like the things that we have to do to reach.
These are all computer models. Like it's not optimism. It's all just guesses.
They have optimistic assumptions to create.
Right. And would you agree that none of the models that you have factor in adaptation? It's just a fact, actually.
Well, adaptation has nothing to do with what the actual temperature is. Adaptation has to do with the negative impact, like the economic cost of those temperatures will have, and how people. The models of like actual temperature adaptation.
Right, but the temperature
adaptations are doing.
Right, but
So
you're
yes, it
taking
is a
you're
factor
taking the
that's going
temperature
to
increases and
adaptation.
you're taking the temperature increases and extrapolating that all these bad things will happen as a result of the temperature. I agree, it doesn't, but you're extrapolating from that, but the extrapolation do not factor in adaptation. Is that correct?
Well, kind of and kind of not, because the things that I'm extrapolating to, like the reduction in fresh water access, the increase in desert regions, those don't care about our adaptations. What the adaptations do is they say, okay, when these things happen, how big of a negative impact are they going to have on the people that it affects? Which I agree, yeah, that's where adaptation comes in. But the things I was talking about, like
well, I'm just saying the models in general that do not factor in adaptation. So the figure that I said at the start, that there's 98% less death from climate-related deaths, those are not factored into the models.
I still don't know what you were talking about with the 98%.
I showed you a trend and you agreed with it. I showed you a graph and you agreed with it that over time, human, just
from
better technology, better use of machinery, better use of infrastructure.
Okay. Yes, I agreed with that, but I also don't think that that's particularly relevant to.
It's very relevant to the increases in temperature. If, for example, temperature increase, let's say just for arguments, if we say temperature increases, but we're able to get everyone in the country a fan or an air conditioner, which I'm just a hypothetical, yeah. Everyone in the country that now has like more heat has a fan and air conditioning, and they have concrete houses or brick houses, and 1 or 2 months of the year it's very hot, but they can adapt to it through these mechanisms. Then no deaths will occur. Just as a hypothetical.
I mean, I sure.
And if, for example, even now to reduce deaths from cold, if like everyone in the country has a brick house, everyone in the country all of a sudden, like from mud huts to brick houses, yeah, has like heating in their home, then let's say 1,000 people died a year from cold. Now there's 10.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
So adaptation does have a factor in terms of like livability, and
adaptation has an impact.
Okay, I'm saying that adaptation is not included in the climate models, in the computer models.
Well, I mean, okay, this goes back to what I was saying before. Of course, adaptation has no impact on the temperature. Adaptation has no impact on the frequency of natural disasters. Of course, it has no impact. Of course, it's not part of those models.
Right, but let's say even if you had a flood or you had hurricanes, well, let's just look at the graph for a second. What does it say? So let's say there's floods, droughts, storms, wildfires, and extreme temperatures. So let's say floods can obviously be helped by adaptations and a variety of things. Take, for example, Haiti or Bangladesh versus, I don't know, Netherlands. Droughts, we have like technology to either make use of less water to be able to irrigate, or we can transport food from other parts that are able to produce it better. Storms,
in theory,
storms are roughly the same as they were in the 1930s. They haven't gone up or down. It's roughly the same. But let's say we do have a storm, so obviously, like
I need a source.
Moving people from, if we have like lots of vehicles to move people out when the storm's happening, and then when the storm is finishing, we go back and rebuild the houses, and we can save lives. Wildfires in the same way. So obviously, like adapting to the environment will save people's lives. Like you can make the claim that it will cost more, but obviously the deaths will go down, right?
Yes, adaptation does reduce deaths from climate. Yes. Cool. But okay, I can answer all the problems wrong with like your implications from this, which are that this like full climate-proof infrastructure doesn't happen overnight. And these regions that are going to be most badly affected by climate are also a lot of times the poorest regions. And you can't just build up their infrastructure to like European or American levels overnight. And even then, it's not clear it's enough in a lot of situations. The areas that are in sub-Saharan Africa that are going to become desert over the next 50 years, it's not clear that even if those people were in the United States, that we'd have the means that'd be like make any economic sense to like build a Saharan desert city. Like it just
you keep referring to the Sahara Desert as if I'm required to now make the whole Sahara Desert green, or else climate or else I've failed in the
No,
argument.
all I'm
I
saying
don't
is
know
that
why you keep
there's
referring
people currently living in regions that have arable land that are
in the Sahara Desert. So
deserts are going to
my
no, they're
job is
not currently in the Sahara Desert, but increasing temperatures are going to expand the desert, and these regions will
okay.
no longer.
Maybe the Sahara Desert will creep out on the edges. Maybe that's right, but it's not like
It's not maybe. It's just
okay. Maybe that
True.
will happen, but like we're talking about like vast continents here, not just that particular part of the, not just that Saharan Desert.
I mean, yeah, we could get into there. That's just one specific example because
But you keep harping on that one example as if like
because
this is where
you
it
told
is.
me at some point during this debate, you said, "Give me a specific example," and I did, and that was the one I gave.
Okay, I was kind of hoping when you said,
look at, for example,
okay, I was kind of hoping that you give me something like a CO2 threshold in terms of a specific example. You keep saying temperature, but let's take your climate model. So we agreed that the climate models don't factor in human adaptation; they just do not. Climate models are made on computer models. We agreed. Hold
What's
on.
your point?
Let me answer your
adaptation.
Let me
Why
answer,
would you think it would?
Trader. Let me just answer your previous point about we can't.
You just returned to this point like
let me just answer.
It makes absolutely zero sense.
Trader. Let me just answer your previous point. What we need, these people need infrastructure sooner rather than later. I agree they need infrastructure sooner rather than later, and I think we shouldn't hamper them in their ability to do so. I think we should help them build their infrastructure as soon as humanly possible. We should give them all the methods in doing so. In addition, energy. Give them energy to be able to build up their infrastructure and to be able to help them help themselves and protect them from the environment. So I think so, and I disagree that we should allow them. I am saddened. I am saddened that people are dying now from relatively preventable things that if they were able to improve their economy, to improve their infrastructure unhindered, then they would be able to live better lives and improve their whole environment and everyone around them. I'm saddened that we even have to have a situation right now where people have to die for a cause that's fictional in 50 or 100 years that we don't necessarily know. It's like an extreme case or catastrophic case that we don't know will be
even in the
so I think we should let those people.
These things are happening.
I think we should let those people. I think we should let those people build their infrastructure, build their economy unhindered, give them access to energy, not let them collapse like in the case of Sri Lanka, because obviously that makes things worse now in terms of even if you want to like send aid from the West, that is still a lot worse if the country just collapsed economically and politically.
Okay,
so I think we should. And the price of fossil fuel was the main or the main factor to that happening.
Okay, let me just.
Now the one other point I wanted to ask is, so I'm going to make a claim, right? During the past on planet Earth, there was periods of time where we had 6,000 CO2 parts per million. But it was largely tropical areas for many millions of years. Like during the dinosaurs, it was, and it wasn't like, I mean, I don't know how many people lived around the Sahara Desert, or even if the Sahara Desert was where it is at the moment. But we had parts on the planet, and we had 6,000 parts per million.
There were not humans around at this time.
Right, there were dinosaurs. I admit there were no humans around.
There were dinosaurs. They were dinosaurs. They weren't people.
Right, but the planet didn't burn. The planet didn't burn in like a hot ball of flame.
No one's saying that.
And it was slightly it was slightly more tropical overall than it is now.
And if you put the dinosaurs in the modern climate, they would have a really bad time, I imagine.
Right. So, but if we had a slightly more tropical planet for millions of years in the future at 6,000 parts per million, then why are all these catastrophic models now? Why are we saying from 400, if we double 400 to 800, then, millions of people will die. Everything will be deserts.
It should be obvious, I guess, but maybe I have to say it, is that the issue is how fast it's changing, and that things adapt for their current environment. And if their current environment changes very quickly, then they are put at risk because especially in like humans cases, we've built up infrastructure for all this stuff, for arable regions being where they are, for people settling where they are. All these things are going to have to change. And even though there will be some land opening up north, on net, we are losing resources in arable land. And I mean, even besides all of that,
are we having issues with producing food?
Your general point, your
Are
general
we having
point
issues with
about,
producing food?
of course, it's true that a 4 degree
What is your
warmer
claim?
planet.
Sorry, what is the claim? Let's say,
Let me just
what
finish
is the claim
addressing
here? Sorry.
your like really bad scientific point about like CO2 levels and sustaining life. Like, of course, a planet that's 4 degrees warmer than today is fully capable of supporting an extremely diverse biosphere, lots of life, all of that, but not the current biosphere. The current biosphere is adapted for this level of heating. That's why the IPCC, here's another number for you. They say that at 4 degrees, 39% of terrestrial species are going to be at high risk of extinction at 4 degree warming.
Okay, let me answer your. Let me answer your point. Look, let me answer your point. So, to some degree, we are getting better in producing food on less and less land. And that has two implications. One, we're able to feed more of the population, but in addition, we are seeing higher greening on the planet because we don't need as much land to produce as much food. We are. I think actually it's reached a tipping point where we need less land now. There's a higher diversity of species because we are leaving green areas where they can then populate. So there is
no, that's not.
There is an index.
Not.
This is
It's,
true.
there
There is a NASA.
not increasing.
There is a NASA
Maybe you're mixing
index
it up
for
with
the
fact
greening
that
of the
there's,
planet.
like, a greening of the planet. Exactly.
Yes.
That doesn't mean that there's more biodiversity.
But
there's going to be there's more carbon in the atmosphere, more plant life, but this is a narrow band of all the species that are going to be thriving, and we're losing biodiversity at like a very, very fast rate.
Well, I'm not entirely sure that the biodiversity is the reason why to let thousands of people die in the present in any case. But
okay, and
again, we are producing enough food, or currently, like we still need to work on the logistics of transporting it from point A to point B where they don't have a lot of it. But we are able to, through technology, through adaptation, produce more food on less land. And as a result, like there is a greening of the planet, as I mentioned, even from NASA indexes about greening of the planet. These areas that are now left away from making food they're able to sustain life from diversity. But I'm not sure that biodiversity is a reason to, again, let thousands of people die in the present.
That's not the only reason.
Go on.
And I mean, the issue too is, like, even if there is greening of the planet, I agree there is.
Okay.
That's not really relevant for humans, because the areas that we used to grow crops are no longer going to be able to support those crops, and people are going to have to. A lot of the infrastructure we built up in areas that are now going to be much more difficult to live in.
So I just told you we produce more food than we ever have.
Today,
are you making the claim that will go down?
I believe it will.
So we are now able to produce more food on less land through more adaptation in the present. Are you saying that at some point we're able to use less food, or are you saying that specific groups of people that use very primitive farming methods will struggle?
Well, a little bit of both, because a lot of the regions that we currently have the farming infrastructure are not going to be great for for growing food anymore.
We can farm food. We can make food in a warehouse. Okay,
but we have to rebuild this infrastructure, and the infrastructure we had is not going to be productive anymore.
A warehouse is just it's just like, metal sheets. Metal sheets
like our food infrastructure, our agriculture infrastructure it comes down to a warehouse.
No, I'm just saying I'm giving you extreme examples. We can make food in a warehouse in a city. We can make food.
We can grow food
on arid land with drip irrigation. But you're saying food is a concern. Yes, you're saying food is a very big issue.
Yes.
Well, I disagree, and there's no evidence to say that. I mean, you can say that people. You can make the claim that people using very primitive farming methods, and they don't have access to tractors, and they use an ox to pull a plow or something, they will struggle more. You can say that they will struggle more, but I don't see how you can make the claim that, using these more advanced and developed agricultural methods, that there is an issue for growing food.
I mean, we're talking about the global poor, right? The global poor aren't building these
drip irrigation can reach. Drip irrigation isn't expensive enough that it's outside the reach.
Okay, they're in regions where their agriculture depends on climate. Is that like too crazy of a statement to make, or would you agree with that?
The
Their
technology,
agricultural
the
yield
technology that
climate, they're just
let me
variation.
let me just
Year in
let
the
me just do
climate
it.
has a big change in their yield.
Let me just do it in a different way, right? So just on synthetic fertilizer alone, the fact that we use it just means that any land you use doesn't have enough nutrients. I mean, maybe some organic, but in general, most lands won't be able to give enough nutrients in the soil for the plants to grow as fast as we are growing them currently. The fact that we're using synthetic fertilizer means we are artificially taking natural gas, making ammonia, putting it in the soil, giving it to the plants,
Okay.
so they grow faster and have more nutrients. So the
Yeah,
whole process is artificial.
Fertilizer works, yeah. Okay.
I'm just saying the whole process is artificial already.
Well, not the whole process. It's not like just the fertilizer.
Sure, but like
you can, like, grow
we have a lot
things
of we have a lot of influence
anywhere.
over it. That it's that we're producing these massive amount of food through.
Yes, and it's just because we have fertilizer, that does increase our yields, yes, but you still need the climate to support the crops, and that's a very important thing, is having the right climate.
Okay, but you're saying the climate will change so much now, because we're producing a lot of food right now that we need even less land than we did in the past, recently, and you're saying the climate will change so much that these advanced areas will have issues growing food, even though we can adapt to it relatively easily, even if it's warmer, even if we need to use slightly less water, like they do in California right now, for example. Even if we do all things, we can still produce enough food, more than enough food, for everyone. Now, again, I'm putting aside for a second, like, people that have very poor areas and they rely on subsistence farming, or like the whole country is still like 90%, third world developing country subsistence farming. I'm putting that aside for 1 second, but I can address that as well. But like all the developed worlds that have all these advanced agriculture techniques, you're saying that they will suffer as well. They will have an issue, and they, as a result, produce less food.
I think the U.S. will continue to be able to produce enough food for its population.
Okay, so we're talking about countries with 90% agriculture, yes? Subsistence farmers.
I mean, yeah, that'd be a good example of areas that are going to be affected by the changes in,
Great. So what dollar a day figure, or what GDP figure, would these people surpass this issue? What if the country goes above a certain GDP, they have access to these technologies and they're able to produce food. And as a result, obviously, of people being more productive with producing food, and we move from a first world to a second world to a first world where just 2% of the population produce food and everyone else does services or whatnot.
Well, I mean, a lot of it isn't just how much GDP do they have. A lot of it is they're just in regions which are
right. But I just explained that if you move away from 90% people working in agriculture and subsistence farming, and then just 2% of the people producing enough food for everyone else to eat, so they can then go on their laptops and make Twitter or whatnot. So what like GDP point does the country have to go past for less people to need to make to produce
my
food?
answer is that's not really, I mean, that's a factor, but that's not all that matters. Because
do you understand what I mean from going to a third world country to a second to a first?
I understand. Yes, I understand. I understand what that means. Let me just say why it's not just that factor only, because
but as a result of this shift from third to second, fewer people need to work in agriculture. A lot less, because it's they're using tractors. It's mechanized now. And a lot less people need to work in agriculture. As a result, a lot less land is required. A lot less resources required to produce more food. Is that accurate to say or not?
It doesn't matter if all of your country's area is now non-arable land.
I'm not sure how we got to that point. Did you understand what I mean?
If you let me talk, I can tell you. Because a lot of these regions which are poor are also equatorial regions. And equatorial regions are going to be the ones that have the worst impact in terms of like how their agricultural capacity is going to be impacted. The U.S. has a lot of high latitude areas which are going to be less badly impacted.
Great. Okay.
The U.S. will still have like a decent agricultural capacity.
I understand. So in these equatorial countries, so let's say right now there's an equatorial country, and 90% of the people are involved in subsistence farming so they can feed themselves and perhaps maybe a little bit more to feed their neighbors, and the other 10% are doing something other than agriculture. If they improve their economy, they have access to energy, they're able to improve their economy, and now they are a second world country, and only 10% of the people or 20% of the people need to be the ones producing food, would it then make sense to say that those 20% of the people don't need as much land as the 90% did before? They're able to produce more food on less land, or in this case, a lot less land, like a quarter less land. They can produce more food, and then the food that they produce goes to other people who are now working, let's say, in factories, but they're not producing food. They're working in a factory, but they are able to get food from less land, less part of the population, even if some part of the country became less arid, some other part of the country did not, because we need now a quarter of the land we needed before.
What if all of the land in the country?
Oh, see, now we're just going with the catastrophic extremes now, aren't we?
This isn't catastrophic extremes. This is even their mild estimate says that these countries that are close to the equator are going to become, some of them are going to have no arable land, and a lot of them are just going to become far, far less productive agriculturally. Even if you offset it with, like, they have drip irrigation, it's not going to be enough.
Right. So I'm saying that if you improve the economy of a country and less people need to farm, those less people need to farm it on less land. Because before, most people were farming.
I understand
now
what you're saying. Yeah, as a country
and it would make sense that if they
Okay.
need less land or a quarter of the land they needed before, they would choose the most productive land for agriculture available to them in the country.
Yep.
So it would make sense that even if, like, let's say, half the country became arable land, there's still the other half to rely on, and we only need half of the half.
Sure.
And even then, we can use, well, they'd use more advanced technologies, synthetic fertilizer, drip irrigation, all the good stuff they'll use to produce more food on that smaller area of land.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I think
I think
we're kind of in agreement then.
Let's not put words in each other's mouth here, but I think that is a good segue into our closing statements. So we'll have reverse order again. So we'll have Trader go first with closing statements. Try to keep them under 2 minutes here. And then just like last time, after we do our closing statements, I'll put a poll in the voice chat. If you were here for the vast majority of the debate, then you can vote in that poll. And then after that, we'll do the same thing as last time, which is we'll open the floor to anyone else who wants to jump in on the conversation. But of course, PZH and Trader would be not at all obliged to continue participating themselves. That would be up to them. All right, Trader, you've got about 2 minutes for closing statement. Go ahead.
Okay. I guess my closing statement is that, the topic of debate was, on balance, whether green policies hurt the global poor. I say they don't. And the reason is, just looking to the future effects of climate change, I think that they are going to be drastic, especially in a case where we stop all green policy altogether. It seems like PZH really focused in on the idea that unmitigated climate change actually won't be that bad because countries can adapt to it by improving their economies and doing different adaptation strategies. I think that this is very unrealistic because the countries that are going to be hit worse with climate change are also the poorest countries. And just not using green energy policies in the nations that currently have them isn't going to slingshot these countries to high levels of development where they now have entire agricultural systems in the middle of a desert, and they have giant seawalls that are protecting all their coastal lands. And they're building, new cities for everyone to escape the 125-degree heat in. I don't think that that's at all realistic. And I think the more realistic case is going to be the one that is described by the IPCC in their moderate model, not their extreme one, their normal one, which predicts that there's going to be at minimum tens of millions of climate migrants by 2050. It's going to be a human disaster of unprecedented scale, and we can do something now by continuing our climate policies that we have and adding new ones.
All right, PZH, closing statement.
Yeah, so Trader's technical position is the more extreme, catastrophic version in the future. It's not the moderate. I'm not sure why he's saying it is. There is a catastrophic computer model in prediction in the future that we need to take action now that costs people trillions and trillions of dollars, freezes people in Europe in the present, hurts poor countries in the present, doesn't let them improve their own economy, doesn't let them improve their own infrastructure, reduces their access to lower cost energy to be able to do that. I think that is, maybe I got a bit heated, but I think that is immoral. I think we should be helping these countries help themselves by giving them access to cheaper energy so they can improve their economy, improve the quality of life. I think that these policies in general are to a large degree nonsense. I think it causes a lot of suffering, especially to the global poor. I've tried to demonstrate that by showing about human adaptation and how we can overcome. I've tried to show that there isn't really a consensus on the extreme catastrophic side of the climate change, and we need to use more common sense models, more cooler heads with regards to this, because it has wide-reaching effect on the planet.